Hello, my name is Justin Leclue, and I'm here today with
Will Sloan.
And you're listening to the Important Cinema Club. And today, we're talking about one of the German filmmaking luminaries.
Rainer Werner Fassbinder, the Andy Milligan of Germany. I've been saving that all week. Just for you.
I was watching Andy Milligan films and I was like, maybe I like these more than Fassbinder's films. But we'll get into that. So, what's your history with Fassbinder?
My history is casual fan. I've probably seen, the man was wildly prolific, over 40 movies, and he died when he was, 40? In his early 40s?
He died in his 30s.
Okay, there you go. An insane body of work, which I've seen probably, 8 or 9 of over the years. And I have liked most of what I've seen. He doesn't speak directly to me. So
a lot of kind of the more art housey filmmakers, I actually discovered Fassbinder on my own reading books in the York University Library, and I think I just stumbled upon a big section just dedicated to him, and I started reading this stuff. And as a filmmaker, he always kind of inspired me in the way that my favorite prolific doing a bunch of stuff guys do. The idea of this filmmaker who made 40 movies in such a small span. He would make 4 to 5 movies a year with a troupe of people that he would just use as a repertory company, giving roles here and there, just doing whatever came to his mind.
And also, voluminous television and theater work as well.
Yeah, Berlin Alexanderplatz, which is this massive sprawling TV movie. That was always amazing to me.
And you really liked his lifestyle.
Oof.
Just a monstrous man who destroyed everyone around him and was like a bull in a china shop, both in his personal life and in film culture.
So it's really difficult for me to separate Fassbinder's life and his movies because they're so intermingled. Especially that one of the major works that I read about him is this book called Love is Colder Than Death, which was written fairly quickly after he passed away. And a lot of famous figures, when they die, there's all these tell-all books that come out. And Love is Colder Than Death is kind of a step-by-step look into his personal life with interviews with the people that were involved. And holy shit, Fassbinder was a huge piece of shit.
And so many of his movies are about, complicated and sadistic power dynamics between people, particularly in the romantic sphere.
So, this idea of, this filmmaker who has a group of people and he works with them all the time, while a utopian idea, Fassbinder would just, play them against each other, play mind games. There's a story right at the beginning of the book that someone came to deliver a film can to him, and Fassbinder was like, hey, you want to go hang out afterwards? And the guy's like, no, I have to go see my friend. Fassbinder was like, okay, yep, sure. And then when that guy left, he was like, make sure to cancel his ticket so he can't go anywhere.
Okay.
He would make people's lives miserable if they didn't kind of step up to his whims. And if he got bored with them, which would happen, he would just treat them like garbage until they self-destructed or somehow got away from him.
And this is the world that we see in Fassbinder's movies.
Oh, yep, exactly.
So yesterday I watched 3 of his movies all in a row.
That's insane.
which is quite a headspace to be in. I watched In a Year of 13 Moons, so I got in with, the toughest one first.
Yep.
Then I watched 2 that I had seen before, The Bitter Tears of Petra von Kant and his beloved Ali Fear Eats the Soul. And, each one got a little easier for me as it went along. And, I guess I was trying to figure out why Fassbinder has never been one of my favorites over the years, even though I often gravitate towards, these artists who put anguished visions into the world, like these cris de coeur.
I think it's probably because he's too popular.
Yeah, perhaps.
He's not a gutter auteur, right? Someone
right.
like Andy Milligan, that he does have a system and support and funding to make these pictures. Like we said, he made some for German television.
Yeah, and also, he is just an extraordinary artist. As a technical filmmaker, on the level of craft, you look at a movie like The Bitter Tears of Petra von Kant, the way he films this one set awe-inspiring. The compositions. I'm babbling, but
Fassbinder got started in theater, and that's where he kind of made his bones. And he did that also because cinema was not something that was that respected in Germany at that time when he started getting going. So when he started making these movies, they could go, oh, he makes films, but he also did critically acclaimed theater.
Didn't he apply to be in one of the German film schools?
He did, and he got turned away.
So he went to this theater company, and through sheer force of personality, he more or less took took it over, and he renamed it the Anti-Theater Company.
So anybody that talks about Fassbinder, they say that, like, he was such a magnetic, charismatic figure. Like, he was gay, and he was openly gay. A lot of his movies deal with that. But women would fall head over heels with him. And throughout his life, he had a trail of women that just followed him and did whatever he wanted.
So in The Bitter Tears of Petra von Kant, which is about this 35-year-old, twice divorced, very flamboyant fashion designer, Petra von Kant, she lives in her apartment/studio with a woman named Marlene, played by Herman, who is her servant, her silent throughout the whole movie, a regular silent Bob, just an observer whose tortured facial expressions sort of tell you something about the power dynamic of this relationship. She is the sub in this relationship. But in real life, Herman was a woman who loved Fassbinder, who he just kind of, I guess, strung along for many years.
I mean, he gave her big roles, but when, like, she went out of her way and was offered roles, oh man, was he angry. Yeah. Like, he hated her for that.
Yeah, so, I mean, a real case of art imitating life, or perhaps vice versa.
I mean, like, Fassbinder, his films are usually an extension of what's going on in his life and how he has to express himself.
So The Bitter Tears of Petra von Kant, which is one of his most famous movies, was the earliest one I watched for this podcast. I think his real breakthrough was Katzelmacher from 1969.
Yeah, like, early on in his career, he brought everything that he had in the theater to the screen. So, like, the one you just mentioned, Katzelmacher, was shot in, like, static wides, and, like, it was definitely, like, a kind of anti-cinema.
I've seen that one, not recently, but I have seen it, and the whole idea with that was it shows this small community of kind of directionless young people, and the visual style of the film replicates their own sense of inertia. And then when somebody tries to break out of the inertia, the visual style, like, the camera starts to move a little more. And that was one of, I think, like, 4 or 5 movies he made in 1969.
Yeah, like, his first film was Love is Colder Than Death, which is a kind of, like, crime thing. If a crime film, nothing happened in it.
Yeah.
And then he moved on, just kind of discovering what he wanted to do in cinema. Like, one of the best things about Fassbinder is that while the thematic stuff is the same, stylistically, he's always experimenting and trying to do new stuff. Like you mentioned, The Bitter Tears, it was based on a stage play, and the way that he shoots it is stagey in the sense that it takes place in one location, but the way the camera actually delineates what's happening and what's going on and power dynamics, it makes it.
Well, for example, there are many times when Petra von Kant will be sort of prattling on, and his camera will hone in on Marlene, the servant, whether she's typing at her typewriter or just looking mournfully on in the background. And that's something you wouldn't get in a stage play, this sort of editorializing. Or oftentimes the characters in the house, because Petra falls in love with Karen, who's a young, beautiful model, and they have a very tortured power dynamic. Originally, Petra wants to kind of dominate Karen, wants to, her idea of love is to possess somebody, but then when Karen, just goes off and fucks someone else,
Petra's destroyed.
Yeah, and then decides to run off. Yeah, like, and Petra von Kant, she's wearing all these wigs, she's wearing all these costumes. Very symbolically, she's surrounded by mannequins that have various articles of clothing on them, as if to suggest to you these are, various personae that she could be wearing, and what even is the real Petra von Kant. But the way that he arranges these people in rooms, depending on who's in the foreground, who's in the middle ground, who's in the background, that will tell you a lot about what the power dynamic is. Or oftentimes his camera will be a long shot with somebody, or maybe 1 or 2 people framed from a distance, like in the middle of the shot, as if to emphasize their isolation. Like, his compositions and his camera work are very heavily symbolic.
Yes, I mean, and going through his films, they either get very abstract, like something like In a Year with 13 Moons, or it can get more almost like realist, like Ali, Fear Eats the Soul. But Petra von Kant, I think, is a really good one to start with, because while it is long, it is contained, and you get a purity to his characters. And while it does end on a downer, it ends on a downer that, like, says a lot about the rest of the movie, and not only ties it up, but kind of underlines it in a way that's really interesting that I didn't always get from his films. Like, I watched a bunch before that, like Beware the Holy Whore, which was a recreation of an experience that he had making the film Whitey. And that film, Beware the Holy Whore, is just miserable. Like, there's really fun technical stuff going on, but every person is a huge piece of shit that is just abusing other people and kind of realigning power dynamics in a way that I find really unpleasant. And, like, there's value in that, but it's just watching all of these movies one after the other. A lot of times that's just what you get, is these complex people. Often they know that they're bad, but they can't help but acting badly, and that's like Fassbinder himself.
It's a hard worldview to spend a lot of time with, I think. I mean, you know, his movies, they're not exactly joyless. I mean, he's very heavily influenced by Douglas Sirk, of course.
Well, that would happen a little bit later in his career. But, like, at the beginning, he was consciously trying to make art films. And then when he fell in love with Douglas Sirk, who was a director for the studio system and would make these very dismissively called woman's pictures that were actually very complex and understood how to use the camera and
quite
color.
Subversive.
Yeah, and subversive. And like Fassbinder fell in love with this filmmaker. He actually went and talked to him for an afternoon, and he kind of took this idea of, okay, what if I did simple things, but then made them kind of emotionally complex in their center? So it's not just technically like, oh, look how crazy it is, or I'm breaking form. It's telling a story anybody can recognize.
Well, you know, Petra von Kant, I think it's a great movie.
I think it's a great movie as well.
Yeah, like, I have a hard time watching it because it's really hard to be in this room for 2 hours with these people. Like, I think it says a lot about, you know, human nature.
I watch The Merchant of Four Seasons, which is the one that came out the same year as Petra von Kant, and that's another one that's, like, heralded as, like, his best, and it's the story of a guy who's kind of, like, let his life go to shit, and him trying to put it back together and doing his best, and basically the theme of the film is that, like, he fucks up right at the beginning again, and then he suddenly starts to put things together, but it doesn't matter because the people around him are so self-destructive that, like, it destroys it for him, and he's haunted by the decisions that he didn't make throughout his life. And it's like another case of misery portrayed beautifully, but at the end of the day, I was sitting there being like, oh my god, this is my seventh one. Like, is this what I have to go through again?
I mean, I think his movies have a lot to say about the way we behave in relationships, because, you know, even
terribly.
I mean,
we all behave
terribly, and even the best among us are guilty of, like, unhealthy power dynamics sometimes. And, you know, we're like Petra von Kant. We all put on personas that are sometimes paper thin, that can be easily punctured.
And it's just like watching these movies and being just refreshed on his life. It was difficult for me to go, like, was this movie worth it, considering the emotional damage he left in his wake?
I mean, I sense that, like, you don't. I mean, I don't know if I like him as a guy, but like, did that kind of heavily weigh on you?
It did, only as it went along, and it, like, the movies, they're not similar, but they just feel the same way. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Well, I mean, sometimes on this podcast, we watch a lot of the same person's movies in a week, and sometimes it gets exhausting being in that world for a week.
And Fassbinder, definitely, like, there was that pull on me, and the images being portrayed would trigger, like, oh, I remember somebody saying this about him. Like, I gotta say, like, Fassbinder, like, he was a monster. Like, he pimped out women when he was in the theater to do funding, to keep the theater running.
I believe he pimped out Udo Kier.
He, like, adopted one of his lover's sons and then gave him to an actor because he got bored with him, an actor who was famous for sexually abusing young boys. And, like, it's just like this kind of, like, wake that he left. And he's dead, right? Like, watching these movies is not giving him any money.
Well, sure, yeah.
It's not giving him any support to those things. But it's difficult for me to watch these films and not think of this stuff that I saw. And I know that, like, any Hollywood movie that we watch leaves, like, tons of bodies in its wake. Like, because if I watch anything by Harry Cohn, I'm reminded that, like, he would, like, molest and rape his actors and treat them like garbage. Even the MGM musicals.
Arthur Freed, yeah.
Yeah, it was revealed after he died that, like, he would, like, whip his dick out to, like, Shirley Temple and stuff like that.
Do you feel, because these Fassbinder movies are such anguished expressions of such an anguished soul?
Like, that's what it reminds me of?
Well, do you feel, I don't know, like, implicated in it in some way? Because I think this is weirdly an aspect of his movies that I like. I mean, there is a real authenticity to the anguish of these films, and it's like there's no comfortable distance from it.
Like, he's not making musicals, like, fun stuff that I can disconnect from the people that actually made it.
I mean, this guy is a very skillful artist, but he's a very, like, truthful and soulful and authentic artist.
I think it's just reminding me of people that I know that are like, I know I'm an asshole, and then they continue to be an asshole.
I also think you don't like the cult of personality around Fassbinder.
No, I don't like the cult of personality around Fassbinder. Oh, you mean, like, today, the way that people...
I think one of the things that sort of has continued to carry him, in addition to...
It's like he's a cool, passionate guy.
Yeah, I mean, in addition to his great films, it's the image of him as, you know, the chain-smoking, leather jacket-wearing...
I do have some dissonance when it comes to the way that he's portrayed in, like, magazines or even, like, Twitter and stuff like that. The way people, like, jokingly talk about him, or he's like, I love him, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, he was a monster! Even though, like, again, why him and not some other people that I know that were also terrible, terrible people? I guess because it's so specific and I guess fresh in my mind.
And
right
also
now.
Because Fassbinder is the canon.
Yeah, he is. He is the canon. Like, you know, all the people that we love, and I'm not going to name names because we'll get to them, like, and we've probably talked about them and didn't talk about their personal life as much as we've done Fassbinder this episode, but it's just because they're so intermingled together.
Yeah. So I watched Ali Fear Eats the Soul again.
Great movie.
I thought it was beautiful and wonderful, and I mean, I had an easier time with this one than Petra von Kant because the central relationship and you know, the two central actors are so moving.
And while it is like a sad movie, it's also one that is about love and love that shouldn't exist, but it's finding a way in this brief moment to exist.
Yeah, so it's about a, you know, aging, I guess she's probably in her 50s, an aging cleaning lady whose children are all grown up and she's a widow, and she forms an unlikely bond with a Muslim immigrant who lives in Berlin, whose name has a long and complicated name, but everyone calls him Ali. And they form a bond that is very much about their kind of loneliness and their outsider status.
A Douglas Sirkian bond, if you will.
And they get married, and their bond is not accepted by anyone in the community. People are either openly scornful, such as her children, or they're, you know, kind of passively scornful, like, you know, the people who work at the bar or the restaurants, you know, many microaggressions that they face. And even when people accept their relationship, they'll often exoticize Ali, like they'll be feeling his muscles or you know, speculating on his sexual prowess or that sort of thing.
And I think that what's beautiful about this film is that, like, Bridget Mura, who plays Emmy, the older woman of the relationship, she's not the person that you're ever used to seeing in these kinds of movies. And that's, like, especially moving. Like, she was an older star of German film, and, like, Fassbinder just grabbed her and he's like, oh, she'd be perfect for this role. And there's something, like, so emotional about that.
Well, there's something so pure about the relationship. It's like the world is a hard place, and, you know, you have to work all day, and your husband is dead, and you have so little, but you've, against all odds, formed this connection. And you should be allowed to have this connection. It's nice that you have this connection, and yet the whole world is conspiring to crush this one connection. The dog is barking in the background. This is the dog you fostered?
Yes.
The dog feels this very strongly too.
This expression. And I think this is, like, Fassbinder at his best, where these emotions are being expressed in a way that's very clear, but it's difficult to deal with, a structure that we all recognize in a form that we're not used to tackling. And I think that's, like, really strong. And it does, you know, reflect Merchant of Four Seasons as well. But I think that Will said it the best. Fear Eats the Soul is easier to swallow because we feel sympathy for these characters. They're not people that we feel pity for because we start seeing them miserable, and they get more miserable as the film goes along. It's people whose lives are kind of deconstructed until it has to reach the tragic climax that all of Fassbinder's films
we genuinely like the characters, and I don't want to say that the movie is necessarily better than Bitter Tears of Petra von Kant because it has quote-unquote sympathetic characters. Because, you know, Petra von Kant has a lot to say as well, but yeah, Ali Fear Eats the Soul is an easier pill to swallow. It's also, I think, rigorously unsentimental. Like,
just direct.
Yeah, and again, filmed with his typical technical mastery.
But even like a Bitter Tears of Petra von Kant, there is an artifice of it taking place on this one set, and the way the camera moves, almost a disconnect that you would get in something like a theatrical experience, while Fear Eats the Soul is just like, you're here, like you're experiencing this. And I think that's why it's probably his movie that gets watched the most. I also watched Fox and His Friends, which is another like direct Fassbinder stars in the film as a gay man who wins the lottery, and then he hooks up with a richer person who abuses him and uses his money, treats him like garbage until, surprise, it ends in tragedy. That one is more of a kind of like, man, there's not really any joy in this film. A roller coaster that takes the downward dive right away and then just crashes in the ground by the time it ends. But it is, again, this like simple, direct, emotionally, like Fassbinder in the main role as Fox is so sympathetic as this kind of like, he's not a simpleton, but he's someone who... He's not used to all this artifice around kind of appearances and stuff like that. Like a lot of like, we're at a rich people's table. Oh no, that's the fork that you have to use kind of stuff until it finally crushes him. Other than that, what was the other movie that you watched?
I watched In a Year of 13 Moons from 1978, a very prickly and thorny film, which is about a transgender woman named Elvira, played by Volker Spengler, who used to be a burly slaughterhouse worker named Irwin. She changed her gender.
She fell in love with a man, and then she went to Casablanca and snipped her dick off.
Yes, I think that's pretty much what they say.
Yes, that's exactly what they say.
And, you know, the movie will certainly be, I think, problematic.
Yes.
For anyone who sees
it. Even when it came out, like, Fassbinder always dealt with critics that were like, your films are, like, anti-feminist, they're, like, anti-transgender people. Like, even The Bitter Tears of Petra von Kant kind of portrayed this relationship, and because lesbian relationships weren't portrayed on screen in that much of a direct way, and it being a negative one, like... What dominated the conversation is like, how could you do this and show this in such a destructive light?
His films don't really seem to fit into any political box.
I mean, people called him political in the sense that he hated the kind of like structure and rigors that were around him, but he never got involved politically beyond the movies that he made, which were very, I guess, reactive.
Yeah, I mean, there's some kind of, there's an anti-capitalist side to his films, I think. I mean, in his public statements, I think he would say things like that he hates the extremists on the left and the right. He sees anger all around him and hate all around him or whatever. And in this one, well, Elvira, having been abandoned by her lover, and she's not really transgender.
No, she's not.
Not in her conception of herself. I mean, she's really a man who is now in a woman's body.
Yeah. The story, just a little bit of context, this is said pretty early on, is that the man she fell in love with said, I could never date you because you're a man, but maybe if you were a woman, and that's what led to the member snipping. This character is living in a state right from the get-go of misery.
Yeah, and misery and alienation. And she spends the movie kind of revisiting sites from her life, whether it's the slaughterhouse or...
A gruesome detail.
Yeah, there's the slaughterhouse. There's the, I guess, Catholic orphanage where she grew up. She sees her children with whom she has, as you can imagine, a rocky relationship. And she... You know, spoiler, folks, she kills herself at the end because there are no happy endings in the Fassbinder oeuvre. And that slaughterhouse scene, you know, it's like Blood of the Beast or something. It's really gruesome. Although, weirdly enough, I got pretty numb to it quickly.
Well, it's a lot of, like, long tracking shots across these things. So there's not that shock of, like, oh my god, I can't believe I'm seeing this. There's more of a, like, you get to live with this as it goes along.
I believe there are some parallels being drawn, you know, perhaps problematically, to the slaughtered cows and her own disfigured body, or what Fassbinder would regard as her disfigured body.
So when I stepped into this film, it was impossible for me to disconnect it to the story that I just read, which was that Fassbinder's lover at the time had committed suicide, and it broke Fassbinder so much that he felt he needed to express it. And this is like a cri de coeur, this film. Like, he wrote it, he shot it, he was his cinematographer for the first time, I believe. And, like, this is such a personal project, and is so, as you said, prickly. More like angry and stabbing in the way that it's presented. But at the same time, there was a bit of a disconnect to me because it is so like a scream throughout.
Well, it gives you really no relief. And even the Berlin that it's set in, I mean, there's a scene where she visits this area where all of the I guess, working class housing has been demolished and more modern, high-priced housing has been built in its place at an enormous profit, of course. So there's this sense of displacement and insecurity, not only in her own body, but also, by extension, Germany at large. Like everything, like nobody fits in anywhere. You know?
I mean, if you want to watch this movie, and I would recommend it if you want to see Fassbinder at his most kind of like dark, and that's saying a lot. Don't watch any other Fassbinder movies around that one, because this one is so pure in its kind of directness that I felt that like the other ones were intruding in a way that like this one is very abstract, especially when it gets near its end, that I had a disconnect with it, where I was like, oh man, come on, like like take a step back. I need something to connect with, as opposed to like, this is so miserable and I know where it's going that I'm not sure what I'm supposed to take out of this other than life sucks and we should all die and it's tragedy. And I know that makes me sound like, oh man, why couldn't they just throw in like a kung fu scene in it or something like that? But because
or a couple of sympathetic characters, quote unquote. Yeah,
it's just because that we did watch so many of these movies over and over again, but this articulation that the world is shit is something that I had gotten.
Right.
And that like it was just digging it deeper and deeper into me. And while I can feel empathy for these people and how difficult life is for them, like it's almost like watching them on a slaughterhouse thing. Like I know where this is going and I'm just waiting for it to happen.
I had trouble connecting with In a Year of 13 Moons for similar reasons, although I watched it with interest and admiration. Just a vision that this pure and bleak.
Yeah. I mean, there's that. And I mean, In a Year with 13 Moons is one of his most heralded, and it makes sense why it would be. Because like artists usually don't get to articulate something so, again, just like pitch black. And he did it right near the end of his career. And a lot of people say that this kind of tainted the movies that would come after this, that because of the suicide of his lover, who at the time he had kind of written a fuck off note to, like, I don't want to see you, I don't want to talk to you, like I'm gonna go do my own thing. Fassbinder himself, I mean, this is projecting that he kind of felt that love was dead and that like love was something that he personally wasn't going to attain in his life. And it feels like the other movies reflect that a little bit, because he would still make a whole bunch of stuff afterwards. Most famously, Berlin Alexanderplatz, which was his like 14 episode mega series, which according to the book I read, and I know a lot of people say this book, you know, pushes things too far, was mostly funded as such a epic project because he needed to pay for his drugs, which at this point were so massive that like he needed a project that like, oh, it's like 14 feature films all shooting back to back to back so he can pay for his cocaine and like all the other stuff that he uses.
And he also made some ambitious late period films like Lola and Veronica Voss. I mean, it is a tragedy that he died so young, because there should have been many more films.
I wonder like where his films could have taken him. Would have been this kind of like even spiraling further into darkness. Like Veronica Voss is an amazing movie as well, and it's like a small black and white one about an aging German actress finding her life unraveling, and eventually tragedy ends at the end. And that one is something that is almost an anomaly in his later films, because Lola and Querelle, they're so abstract and expressionist. Like Lola is shot all in these crazy colored gels. Querelle is also shot in these like warm, the sun is setting in everything orange hues, which is set on like an expressionist studio backlot. So it almost feels as if like Fassbinder feels that he pushed things as far as he could in the emotional stories that he wanted to tell, and only expressionism and abstraction in a different way than he did at the beginning of his career was the way that he could express himself, almost as if he was saying like, I don't know what other stories to tell, and I need to tell stories because it's the only way that I can live.
Well, I would like to conclude with a quote by Fassbinder. He said, "In my film, love engenders violence and vice versa." So there you have it, folks.
It says everything that it has to say. All right, so as per usual, you can send us letters at importantcinemaclubpodcast@gmail.com. And this week on our Patreon, we did an episode on how to start your own film club. And we recommended 6 movies that we believe would be good starter films if you want to do this. And this is as per the request of man who has the Important Cinema Club logo tattooed on his knee, Michael Hendra. And we hope that you find it informative, Michael, because you'll be living with us for the rest of your life.
Wow.
And
I've never felt such power. I'm the real Fassbinder.
Yeah, you're manipulating and using people. And as per usual, that's $5 a month, and you get 4 episodes a week. And we're also starting the Important Cinema Club newsletter. And I don't just mean something that you receive every week by email. I'm talking about a physical newsletter that you'll receive in the mail that will be all exclusive writing that you can't find anywhere else. And that'll be a $10 a month Patreon tier. So the newsletter, we're just kind of figuring what it's going to be at first. Like maybe it'll be like reviews, thoughts, recommendations. One idea that I would love to do, and it would just, I have to figure out exactly what pieces would go into it, would be like a newsletter that looks like a fake cinema, like the Important Cinema Club Cinematheque, all the films that we programmed in that month that doesn't exist, just to serve as like capsule reviews and recommendations and stuff like that.
By the way, there will also be a larger writing project coming soon.
Yes.
Which we're not ready to announce.
We're not ready to announce that yet, but the newsletter is like a real scruffy thing. I was inspired by Michael J. Weldon in the introduction to the Psychotronic Video Guide, talks about that early in his career. He used to do like a weekly mailer that would have all the TV movies that are playing that week and like little capsule reviews, and I love the idea of that. So that's basically in the spirit of that, but not exactly, and it'll be monthly. So you can check that out at patreon.com/theimportantcinemaclub, and that's the new $10 tier. Also, we're announcing that we're doing a contest. We're going for 200 Patreon subscribers. And once we hit that number, what we're going to do is that we're going to pull 3 names out of a hat, and the number 1 winner, and this we can announce at that time, will win a yearly subscription to the Important Cinema Club. No, like, you don't have to pay for anything. You'll just get them exclusive to you, and you'll also be able to pick a topic of a Patreon episode.
Sure.
So that'll be the number 1 prize. There's going to be a second place and third place prize, but we're just pushing for those 200 Patreon subscribers. And I should also point out that if you want to check out like lists that we talk about or can't remember all the movies we talk about, check out Film Trap, because I've been keeping it up that every week I post on, when I post on SoundCloud on that website. And like last week when we recommended Vinegar Syndrome titles, I actually listed all the Vinegar Syndrome titles that we mentioned and have links to the page. So when that Black Friday sale happens, you can just get them right away and make sure that they are not out of stock. So our first letter is from Tony Marshall, and it goes, questions, comments. Hey guys, big fan. Enjoy your podcast a bunch. Thank you. As a Scot, I relate a lot to the state of Canadian cinema. Growing up, I saw a lot of my country in Canadian, Irish, and Australian cinema, and have a soft spot in my heart for it. Will you guys ever do an episode on a Scottish director, such as our auteurs Lynn Ramsay, We Need to Talk About Kevin, Bill Forsyth, Local Hero, Bill Douglas, the Bill Douglas trilogy, or our journeyman Paul McGuigan, Lucky Number 11? We will never do an episode on him. I do not like him. Paul McGuigan is the guy who gets like the best movie properties and does the most boring stuff with them. It was a Rogers Video staple that I would get his films and be like, maybe this one will be good. Like a Pulp Fiction ripoff, Lucky Number 11, or like a proto Marvel superhero film, Push, and they would always consistently be very boring. He would go on to direct episodes of Doctor Who, though, and they were okay. Or David Mackenzie, Hell or High Water. Oh, that's the guy who also had Outlaw King come out on Netflix this week. Most of which I think have had interesting careers, and their work is filled with hidden gems. P.S. You're welcome for Norman McLaren, who, he's correct, he is Scottish, not Canadian. He just came to Canada to work at the NFB. Sincerely, Anthony Marshall. Scottish directors. I don't feel like we could do an episode without Matthew Kumar by our side.
Okay.
You don't think that just because like Matthew Kumar, I feel would give a perspective to like whatever we're talking about Scottish wise. Yeah.
Does he have any favorite Scottish auteurs?
I don't think he does, but I think that like if we can, like, I mean, we talk about like Bollywood and stuff like that, and we don't have people that know Bollywood, but the fact that I know someone from Scotland, and it's really interesting to watch movies with Matthew that are from like Scottish origin or even just the UK, because his perspective is so different than mine, and he can inform so much stuff. I think that he's in LA right now, but if he comes and visits soon, we should do like a Patreon episode or like a normal episode on a Scottish filmmaker, because I think it would be really interesting. Or maybe we'll do one before that if Matthew decides to stay in LA forever, abandoning his good friend Justin DeClue, which hurts my feelings, but you know, it's nice that he's successful. That was just for Matthew. And the thing is, if we do a Scottish episode, Matthew would write such a long letter and reply clarifying and letting us know that things are wrong. So it's better just to have him on.
Well, Matthew, if you're listening, feel free to send a letter with your favorite Scottish
filmmakers.
Yeah.
And Matthew, are you a Patreon subscriber yet? So next week, what are we doing, Will?
we will be traveling back to India and looking at the most famous Bollywood star, although I think Bollywood is maybe not the correct word.
I'll just say Indian cinema.
Yeah, the most famous Indian star.
Or Hindi cinema.
Yes, the most famous star of Hindi cinema, and that is Amitabh Bachchan.
Amitabh Bachchan, co-star of The Great Gatsby, right?
Yes, and I'm sure that's the movie we'll be talking about.
No, he's a guy who stars in Sholay. He stars in...
Bol Bachchan.
Yeah, that's right.
He stars in Dawn.
Yeah.
Sarkar.
Coolie.
Yeah.
He's a guy that like I've always been fascinated by because he's such a huge star. Like he's the actor who gets mentioned in Slumdog Millionaire at the beginning, who comes and visits the main character.
And he's not just a star there. He's like
a superstar.
He's like Abraham Lincoln over there, okay?
He's been in politics. He's been the host of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire for a while. Yeah. And like we're going to do our best, but like when we did our Bollywood episode, like we're coming from a place of complete distance from this.
Yeah.
But I'm really excited to jump in and discover more and to watch his movies and to try to understand like what makes him a superstar.
And in fact, one of his movies is playing in theaters right now, so you and I are going to hit up the Albion Cinema in Etobicoke tomorrow night.
Yep, the Indian cinema, and I'm very excited because we haven't been since Bahubali 2.
Yeah.
So until then, my name's Justin McClue.
I'm Will Sloan.
Thanks for listening. Recently, our Laser Blast Film Society screening at the Royal Cinema was going to happen on November 1st, and that's my birthday. And when I learned that it was going to be my birthday, I was like, Peter, who is my co-programmer, can we just do something that like I would love and I would always love to see on the big screen? Like, I'd love to do Godzilla Final Wars. And I know this is an impossible ask, because Godzilla films, they don't play on the big screen ever. There's no retrospectives, there's usually nothing. And the reason for that is Toho doesn't have any interest or want to jump through the hoops to make that happen.
It's too bad.
Yeah, I don't understand why not. Maybe they've been burned too many times by like American distributors and stuff like that.
I remember in the mid-2000s, for the 50th anniversary of Godzilla, the late lamented Cinematheque Ontario did a program of movies. That's the only time I can remember.
Yeah, I think that it must have been like a sweetheart deal, because what ended up happening is that Peter was able to get Toho to give us permission to play the film, but this was only because he personally knew the director, Yuhei Kitamura, and they realized that he was the Midnight Madness programmer at the Toronto International Film Festival. That's the only way. Right. And he had to talk to them and kind of like make a deal with them that we could play Godzilla Final Wars. But we did, on the big screen, where that movie is meant to be watched.
Well, I remember when Godzilla Final Wars was being made. This was the 50th anniversary Godzilla movie, and it was going to be
the last one.
The last one for a while, at least. And as the 50th anniversary movie, it was going to have all these monsters, all the classic monsters from Godzilla history, and they were going to come back, and it was going to be an all-out blowout. And of course, I was really hoping it would play in theaters in North America, and in fact, it had a Hollywood premiere.
Yes.
At which Godzilla got a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, and there are wonderful pictures you can look up of Godzilla, a man in a Godzilla suit holding up.
I have the video of the event, and it was in English because it happened in Hollywood, and it's fascinating.
So the movie did not get a North American theatrical release.
Because it bombed in Japan. It did very badly.
Yeah.
And I actually approached it at the time, not as a Godzilla fan, but as a fan of the director. Because he made Versus, he made Azumi, and I remember reading reviews at the time when it came out, and it sounded so insane that I was like, whoa, this is going to be the greatest movie ever. And then I saw it, and I remember at the time I saw a bootleg version that had no English subtitles, and there is English in the movie, so I did have a guide throughout it, but I had no real idea of what was going on, and it was the greatest movie of all time. Close to the greatest film. As our friend Matthew Kumar says, Ikiru, Godzilla Final Wars right underneath. But, like, as a Godzilla fan, a lot of people were disappointed. And you said that you actually felt a little bit of disappointment at the time as well,
Yeah,
right?
I was a teenager when it finally hit DVD shelves in North America, and I remember thinking I was alienated by Yuhei Kitamura's style, which
Post-Matrix.
Post-Matrix, a lot of... Yeah, post-Matrix. That's the best way to describe it.
Basically, people stopping bullets with their hands, the camera swirling around people.
And I thought, this isn't Godzilla, and so I was very frustrated. But... I'm older and wiser now, and I saw the movie, and really, it's in the spirit of the really silly Godzilla movies of the 70s, but which had space alien invaders and stuff like that. It's not in the spirit of the classic 1954 original.
I don't know who still wants that movie.
I mean, there are many people who are purists who say that Godzilla should be scary.
So they're like a fan of that one, Godzilla 85... and parts of Godzilla 2000, I guess. Because every time they reboot the Godzilla franchise, they're like, all right, now he's going to be scary like the original. And eventually that just kind of goes, or Shin Godzilla, which plays in that space as well. I remember showing this to a friend and like kind of hyping it up, and then we watched it. And about an hour in, he's like, man, I don't want to watch this. Like, I don't want to watch Power Rangers. Like, I want to watch Godzilla movies.
I think that was probably my reaction when I was 15.
And watching it like now, and having memories very clear of the other Godzilla films, I have to say, what the fuck is he talking about?
Well, the epiphany I had watching it this time was most Godzilla movies are boring for 50% of the time.
50? That would assume there's like 50% Godzilla.
Well, there are a lot of scenes of people sitting in offices and scientists talking about, how he's appeared in Tokyo Bay. What could this thing be? Or there are scenes of like a reporter talking to somebody who knew Godzilla 50 years ago. And it's like, oh, I think Godzilla's coming back. This one, it's the Power Rangers.
Yeah,
and I think I would take that.
Yuri Kitamura's like, would you rather have scientists talking kind of anonymously in a boring kind of set, or would you rather have two men have an extended martial arts fight on motorcycles?
Yeah. And I also, when I first saw it, thought there wasn't enough Godzilla.
There's so much Godzilla.
I was wrong. I don't know. Hey, there's more Godzilla
than any
pound
Godzilla
for pound
film,
in this than most.
I mean, I can understand somebody going like, too much Godzilla. Because once Godzilla makes his like big appearance, other than the prologue, it's just Godzilla time the entire way through, as he goes through all the most famous monsters in like the classic style. Like, that's probably the best decision Yui Kitamura made, which is that he could have gone in and been like, I'm going to shoot this like Versus, like the way Godzilla films have never been shot, and he didn't. He just shot it classically, the man in suit on a set action. And it's so much fun.
But the best thing about the screening was you got an intro from Yui Kitamura, which you ended up playing afterwards because it was 20 minutes long.
Yes, it was very long.
And he was just very reflective, and he talked a lot about it. And he talked about the heartbreak of when it came out and people didn't like it. But many people have come to like it over the years, and how the love of the fans keeps him going as a filmmaker.
And I mean, Yui Kitamura is a guy who's like had a lot of, you've given this great opportunity, and then he makes a great movie or like the best movie he can, and then it just get tanks. Like his Hollywood debut, Midnight Meat Train, which is a lot of fun, got dumped because Lionsgate like shifted personnel, and then nobody cared.
Starring Bradley Cooper.
Bradley Cooper, who Yui Kitamura says he's still very good friends with.
Well, maybe Bradley could throw him a bone.
Throw him a bone. And then like Yui Kitamura made like WWE films. He went back to Japan and he did some stuff. I did
see his WWE film, No One Lives, I believe.
Let us not speak of it. Let us just praise Godzilla Final Wars and how fun it is, and the fact that I'm glad that like people are turning around to it, because like when I watch it, I go, why would you not enjoy this? Like, this is a film that just wants to entertain you. And, like, it obviously tries as hard as it can and gives the great starring role to Don Fry, the UFC fighter.
Just one of the most distinctive white guys to appear in a Godzilla.
He looks like a computer took a video game like Final Fight and made him real.
It's like imagine Jesse Ventura, but he was giving a totally affectless performance.
Yes. There's what is it? There's two things you don't know about this world. One of them is me. The other one is Godzilla.
But he doesn't do it with anywhere near that level of expression.
But that's what makes it great.
He holds a samurai sword and he's got a big mustache. Don Fry's... why didn't he become a star?
I don't... Like, why didn't Japan just, like, jump on him and use him in, like, DTV? There's a shot looking up at him where his face, like, in the theater. And I gotta say, the audience was great. We applauded, we cheered when stuff happened. But there's, like, a low-angle shot of Don Fry where he smiles. It's like Mount Rushmore smiling.
You know, I just remembered that there was a time, and I want to say like 2002, 2003, when one of the rep theaters in Toronto played Godzilla vs. Megalon on 35mm. Oh, yeah. And I was too young to go.
Really?
Well, I mean, I think my dad probably just didn't want to take me.
No, he's like, you can see Godzilla whenever you want. Like, why do we have to go out to see it in theaters?
Oh God, I wish I.
But we got to see Godzilla versus
We saw Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla, the first one, at Sonic Boom. The
Yeah, on
record
a
store.
16mm print.
It was a 16 millimeter television print that had totally been turned red.
Still beautiful.
It was
though.
still wonderful because it was free admission. Well, you paid $5 and you got a beer.
Yeah. And like, if only that could be recreated. I mean, for people in Toronto, me and Peter, like, that was so much fun that we're like, we want to do a Godzilla marathon.
Yeah.
And like, I can't imagine how fun it would be with an audience to watch a bunch of Godzilla movies and just see it evolve as it goes along. But until then, people at home, watch Godzilla Final Wars.